I'm super excited to have you back on the podcast. I'm so grateful for you to take some time. Uh, the Emotional Gangster. I love big, large, tattooed, bearded people who want to talk about their heart, right? It's my favorite thing. My kids make fun of me because they're like, "You cry more than mom." And I'm like, "Yes, but it's not I'm just I have feelings, man. I gotta let them out." So I love that you're here with us today, talking on the Real Talk podcast, and I look forward to unpacking some stuff with you. Um, why don't you just give us like the cliff notes of like how you landed where you are currently, and and who you are and what you're about, and then we'll get into some questions and some stuff.
Yeah, sounds good, brother. So thank you, Big Keith, for letting me do this with you. Totally appreciate it. And it's awesome, like you said, networking, meeting, collaborating with other men that are not afraid to talk about hard stuff and deep stuff. And like you said, lean into it and run to the sound of the guns instead of run away from the sound of the guns, from an emotional perspective. And, and for me, I grew up in my mom, she's a 4'10" little Hispanic lady. My dad was a big giant white dude who was an ER doctor. He died about 13 years ago. The way we would do conflict in our house was we'd yell and scream at each other and then come back an hour later and act like nothing happened. So I learned as early as I can remember how to stuff and avoid my emotions. I learned that emotions were not important. I mean, not that I didn't know what they were, but I just, all this stuff I was feeling, like I was feeling intense. I was feeling this intensity, had no names for it. But I learned that, okay, clearly because we're not talking about it, they must not be important. So I'm just going to stuff and avoid them. And that led to and leads to, when we don't validate and affirm the emotions of our children, it leads to a lot of other emotional dysfunctional issues, which I've got a laundry list, and I'll just to share a few. That led to a hardcore people pleasing addiction, food addiction, emotional neediness, emotional codependency, toxic positivity, uh, uh, self sabotage, self condemnation, self hatred, imposter syndrome, monster insecurities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then I went in the military, went to West Point. We are not talking about feelings and emotions at West Point. Went to Ranger School, which is the Army's elite weight loss program, right? And they were, we were not talking about feelings and emotions in Ranger School. Then went to the 82nd Airborne Division. I was an infantry officer in the 82nd Airborne Division. And then I got into a business cult and ironically did very, very well in that business cult because of my emotional dysfunction. It was a very, very toxic environment. They relied on control and manipulation and shame and guilt. And but because I was not emotionally aware at all, I had very low EQ. I did very well. We made, six figures in 5 years. We traveled all over the world speaking to thousands of people. And then 4 or 5 years ago, yelled at my wife 3 times in 3 weeks, and she said three things. Number one, don't never do that again. Number two, you've never done that before, which means number three, you got more issues in Time Magazine. And I was like, snap, baby, right? Went to counseling, and the therapist was like, hey, dude, let me introduce you to two revolutionary new concepts. And again, this is just 4 years ago. This isn't 10 years ago, 20 years ago. This is literally just 4 years ago. And I'm like, dude, what's these two revolutionary new things? And he's like, dude, feelings and emotions. I was like, WTF, right? Where are the fajitas? I was like, what are you talking about, bro? Like, I've never needed feelings and emotions. Like, what do I need them now for? He's like, well, because McFly, the reason you yelled at your wife is because you've been storing up all these emotional injuries, feeding your little cute, furry, emotional monkey in the basement when you were a child. Multiply those emotional injuries by 4 decades, and now you've got a 600 to 800 pound emotional gorilla on your back that you can't hide in the basement anymore. And so that put me on a very intentional emotional fitness program. 2 years into that emotional fitness program, all these big rocks in my life started to change and improve and transform for the better. My faith, my marriage, my parenting, my finances, my fitness, my business. Started a podcast 3 years ago when COVID came out, talking about my emotional journey, my emotional fitness journey, and the junk in my trunk and my corresponding lessons learned. And now I do speaking engagements, I do executive coaching for leaders on emotional intelligent leadership, and then I still have my podcast and YouTube channel.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So there's so much to unpack there, and I think most guys have similar journeys, even without maybe West Point, without Ranger School, without the specifics. We all get into careers that don't allow or promote or expect emotional intelligence. They don't let you talk about your feelings or your emotions. You get into sports. I got a 15-year-old playing lacrosse right now who's shared with me that there's a lot of single parent energy on that team that they don't have father figures to begin with, let alone, people who are able to help them understand what or how to emote and what that looks like, what healthy emotions look like. Like I grew up, my parents would fight and fight and fight and argue and argue and argue. But I never saw them make up, right? And I never saw
Mhm.
and I watched them just belittle each other and destroy each other. When I got married, I went into it half thinking, man, if I get 5 years out of this marriage, I will have won. And
Wow.
because that's what I expected. That's just all I saw. My dad was married 3 times. Now my wife and I are married 25 years and it's amazing. But it's well, like you talked about, it's that work you got to put in to figure it out. So I kind of want to talk about just kind of kick it off with like, I think when people hear emotional intelligence, they think like oversharing, vulnerability. There's all like not everybody necessarily understands what EQ is or how to measure that. So can you give me a little bit for people listening, like what do you actually mean when you talk about that? Is it just the ability to cry at Moana, or are we talking about something deeper?
Yeah, great question. So I'm gonna do three layers of definitions. I'll start
Yeah.
with the easy one first, and then I'll work into the weeds. So emotional intelligence is getting your emotions to work for you instead of against you. So that's the first one. The second one is it's a guy named Daniel Goleman. He's one of the OGs of emotional intelligence, and he talks about one of his early models of emotional intelligence. There's a lot of different models now, but one of the ways he early on kind of characterized emotional intelligence is self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and social management. So a self and social component, or self and others component, or self and relationship component, and along with the awareness and the management. That's the second way, kind of big picture. And again, there's lots of different emotional intelligence models out there. I'm certified on and it is a scientific psychometric assessment that measures 15 different areas of emotional intelligence. But the easy one to like to just start off with is the self awareness, self management, social awareness, social management. And then the way I define emotional intelligence is the ability to acknowledge, identify, process, and manage not only my emotions, but the emotions of others in order to make the best decision for all parties involved. That last part there is specific for leaders, for parents, folks that are responsible for other people. So because there also is a dark side of emotional intelligence. There, for example, there's a hardcore narcissist that I knew from the business cult that I was in, and he intentionally specifically learned about emotional intelligence so that he could control and manipulate people even better. So there's a
Yeah.
dark side to it as well.
Yeah, and that's why I asked because I think some people and it's there's this whole, conversation around toxic masculinity, toxic feminism, all these different things. And I find that a lot of times we get these concepts and there are people that sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, they weaponize it, right? Like as I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking, man, I've got self-awareness, I've got social awareness, I feel like in the emotional intelligence sphere, I have a deeper understanding than a lot of my peers. But as you were talking, I realized where I'm weak is in recognizing the emotions of others. Like I don't always pick up. In fact, I don't like empathy and like Gallup Strengths Finder, right? So like all those emotion or all those relational strengths are super low for me. So I don't necessarily pick up on other people's emotions. So just as you were talking, I was like, okay, here's something that I think I could dive into a little bit and work on. because I know how I feel. I feel like I like, and I'm human. I mean, I have days where I just want to choke people, and so I know that I'm not great at all of it, right? But I love that you bring up like the ability to also understand what other people are feeling, because I think that's a really key thing. And we get into this headspace of like, well, your feelings aren't my fault. Like it's not my responsibility. And it's like, well, that's true to an extent, but you have impact, right? Like when your wife says to you, well, you've not yelled at me like that before. It's like, well, I haven't been this mad before. But also, how did that make her feel? And if you love her, you have a response or a respect for her, a responsibility that should make you go, how do I do that different?
And we should ultimately take responsibility and ownership for how we communicate. So
Yeah.
I could say, hey, screw you, Keith. I don't care how it hits you, right? And verbally throat punch you and say, well, I don't care for like, okay, well, dude, you're acting like a 5-year-old also, right? So
Mhm.
so again, emotional intelligence, you know what I mean? We should take responsibility and ownership for how we communicate. Now, ultimately, you know, am I responsible for the emotions that you feel when I'm communicating? No, I can't control that, right? And ultimately, you can't either. To be honest with you, we can't
Yeah.
control the chemical combinations that kick off, but we should be as responsible human beings. I do want to be aware of how my communication is and how can I most effectively communicate so that Keith receives whatever message I'm trying to communicate. Because the other thing is, if I communicate my whatever I'm trying to communicate in a fist, and I'm coming at Keith, well, guess what Keith's going to do? You're going to duck and avoid whatever message
Yeah.
is. And I can say, well, I don't care if it hurts you. Well, I'm also being ineffective as well, right? We see it on
Right.
social media all the time, right? The yellers and the screamers and they vilify you and verbally assassinate you.
Yeah.
How productive is that? Like, where does that accomplish it?
Right. Yeah. So I think I love that. And I think that that's a really good thing to bring up is like, what is the intention of our communication, right? Like, if I'm trying to problem solve, if I'm trying to build relationship, then my communication has to be effective. So I think that's a really great reason of why somebody may be listening to this going, why, right? Like that guy's that guy. He thinks the way he thinks. I'm not going to change his mind. It's like, well, you don't have to change his mind. But if your coworkers, if your family, if you're in some sort of community, right? Church, space. I mean, we all interact with other human beings. And so what's the intention of our communication? Are we trying to restore, rejuvenate, lift up, right? Then there becomes a reason. Because I've always needed to like understand. And I think this was the hardest part for me in like our own marriage when my wife would tell me how she felt or how she was receiving things. I'm like, but I can't control that. Like, but that's not what I said, right? I would say that all the time. That's not what I said. And it took me a long time to understand that like it is relevant to me. It is incumbent upon me to help her. And so I have to change the way I communicate because my intention is that we're good, right? We're moving in the one direction. So I'm curious if you can share maybe some thoughts on how do you start to like recognize for somebody who's listening to this going, what the hell are they talking about? Where are some places there's got to be like some 30,000 feet viewpoints that you can go, you know what, if you just start looking at how is this working? How is that working? Where would you start with someone who doesn't have a clue what we're talking about?
And I'm gonna hit that in just a second. I'm gonna pull up my assessment here, and I'm gonna read through some of those different
Awesome.
other metrics that are tracked in the area of emotional intelligence. I'm gonna give you one example. Before I do that, though, the other thing I want to just add on to the previous section is not only should if the two of us are in a conversation and we're having a discussion, not only should I take ownership and responsibility of the message that I'm trying to deliver, but I also want to be a responsible member of this discussion, and I want to take ownership and responsibility of truly understanding where Keith is coming from.
Hmm.
And because I maybe have missed it, like, okay, Keith, can you, I'm just trying to understand, Keith, so I'm not, this is not a rebuttal, it's not an attack. I'm just trying to understand where you're coming from. When you said this, can you kind of unpack that for me? Right. So rather than just like, oh, because that's what happens. We immediately take this narrative. Oh, I know exactly before Keith's even done talking, I've already got the narrative, and I I know where Keith is going. Do I
Right.
really? Do I really know where
Right.
Keith is going? But I already know where in my head where you're going, and then I respond based on where I thought you were going, and you were going over here, and now you're like, dude, right? And then we get in a conflict, and like, oh, okay, Keith, sorry, dude, I missed something. Clearly, let me slow down, right? So anyway, it's a responsibility on both the communicator and the receiver
Yeah.
to really understand. Anyway, so back to so how do you know? I'm going to share a couple different things. So how do you know? Like, what are some? That's a great way to put it. What are some ways to tell if someone has a high EQ or low EQ or kind of where their EQ is? You can tell the size of a man by the size of the things that makes him angry.
Okay.
So that's one thing. You can tell
Okay.
the size of a man by the size of the things that makes him angry. So you know, some folks will, you know, this my highlighter was on my desk at a 13-degree angle instead of a 14-degree angle, and I lose my mind and I yell at my wife and I kick the dog and I
Mm-hmm.
kick the cat. Okay,
Yeah.
dude, really? Right? So again, emotional awareness and emotional management. That's low EQ. So what angers you? How how patient are you? Again, what is how aware are you of not only yourself but again of others around you? Can you notice the nonverbals that people are putting
Yeah.
off? Something a great practice that I love doing when I'm working with some of my different executives is I'll have them watch a movie with the sound off.
Okay. Tell me more.
And then and it's a fun exercise to do with the family. So like an Avengers movie or something fun for the kids that the kids would dig, and turn the volume off, and then you know anyone in the family can say, okay, stop, pause the movie, and in that moment go character by character. Okay, what's in this scene? What is based on the expression that Keith's got right now? What's Keith's actor? What emotion are they portraying right now? And then talk about, oh, that's not what I saw. I saw
Mm.
I don't think he's fresh. I don't think he's angry. I just think he's annoyed. I think he's annoyed at, you know, the Incredible Hulk because of, you know, whatever, right? So
Yeah.
and then this is another really good one too. If they can, if they're in a scenario, a work environment where they can do this, I also think it's fun. I've recommended this a number of times too, to set up a camera in their office or at home, and and just video the interaction of with you with your family and also you with your coworkers, and again watch the replay, watch the recording of both at work and at home without the sound on. What are your nonverbals saying
Yeah.
when you're talking to your wife, when you're talking to little Johnny, little Susie, when you're talking to Bob, when you're talking to Karen at work? What are your nonverbals saying? And can you still play that same game and recognize, oh man, because here's the thing, the other thing too is there's a couple of the different personalities that that their default face is rough, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of folks are not aware of their default face and their default kind of like in the, my wife is one of those. She has a particular personality. She's pretty focused, serious person, and sometimes like, you know, I would take a, or on Zoom is another great time to do it
Yeah.
when there's a big Zoom with folks, right? I'll take screenshots and I'm like, hey guys, like, look at everyone's faces here. What do you think? What's that communicating, right? If you're the new person on this
Yeah.
Zoom, this web conference, anyway, so nonverbals is really big. Um,
Yeah.
so those are some fun exercise. All right, let me just read through the assessment here. Let me just read off. So self-regard, how does someone feel about themselves? Self-actualization, which means how how intentional are they at wanting to grow themselves? Their self-awareness, already mentioned that. Expression, emotional expression.
Mm-hmm.
How how good and consistent is someone at communicating their emotions? How comfortable are they? Assertiveness, independence, interpersonal relationships, empathy, social responsibility, problem solving, reality testing, impulse control, flexibility, stress tolerance, and optimism are all also facets of of emotional intelligence
Yeah.
as well.
I love it. I love it. So I have a question for you. Uh, some people, like you mentioned, some people kind of have that just demeanor where they're naturally kind of grumpy looking, right? Um, I would probably fall into that category where if I'm just sitting there doing a thing, I look like I'm not happy. I mean, I shared with somebody. I was like, "This is my happy face. Like this is cool. I'm having a good time. This is where we're gonna go." But I'm curious about how someone who is expressive, right? Because and so this is a personal thing that I've experienced with my wife. She will say something or do something that I don't really have any judgment about, but I do have from an observational standpoint, like, well, that was interesting, or it'll make me laugh, or I'll make a face because I'm like, well, that's an interesting, like, I just don't understand the choice. And there's no like thoughts of that was stupid or that was dumb or anything like that. It's just more of a like, okay, huh. Or in conversations with coworkers, they'll suggest something that I clearly think is not the right solution. I have a really hard time, and I'm wondering if you have any tools for anyone else that may experience this where I just wear my emotions on my sleeve. If you tell me to do something and I think it's silly, I'm going to kind of be like, okay, that's it. So how do you manage that? Because I don't get angry about it, but I think the people going back to like how people receive it, I think because of my expression and because of the way that I'm showing up, they're thinking he's angry, he's frustrated, I made a bad choice. When I don't think any of those things, I'm just like, huh, okay, well, whatever, and then move on. It's like I was saying, like I'm very self aware and I can process that stuff quickly, but how do I do that without offending the other person?
Yeah, excellent question. Excellent question. So our nonverbals have consequences,
Yeah, that's exactly
regardless of intention. You could have the best intention. Well, and my wife, well, man, this is just, I'm just thinking, I'm just focused. I'm like, babe, I got that. But when you're in a room full of people that are all listening to you and you look angry and pissed, it comes across a certain way. And you just have to
right.
realize, again, I know that you're not angry and pissed, but there are consequences to our nonverbals. And so the self-awareness is huge. So number one, just being aware, okay, crap, I've got my default kind of angry face on, or focused face, whatever. So a couple things: either you stop doing it and you get better at smiling more, or
Okay.
you communicate to your people, your audience and stuff. Hey guys, I just want you to know there's nothing wrong. I'm not upset. I'm just really focused right now, and it may look like I'm really serious. I'm in a super mood. I'm having a blast. I've just got a lot on my mind, right? So just verbalize it and let folks clear the air, because especially as leaders and as men for families, right? We can set a tone just by our nonverbals if we don't communicate. Hey, family, everything's cool.
Yeah.
I'm just doing a lot of thinking right now. There's nothing wrong with the family. Just got a lot of work stuff on my mind, or so be
Yeah.
self-aware and then communicate about it.
Communicate. So it's interesting to bring that up because my wife has told me at times that I go into event mode. So for a long period, I was an event producer. And so as we got closer and closer to show day, I'm 12 steps ahead in my brain. And my kids would ask me a question, and I would give them not an impolite answer, but it would be short. And it would be like, yes, no, Tuesday. And she's like, don't worry, guys, he's in event mode. And so I'm aware of it and I want to try to help them understand, but I also want to sort of just in a vulnerable space share that so other people can go, I know what that's like. Like, and I love that you brought up like in your family, like dads are carrying in a lot of instances the majority of the weight of their family. And kids, I mean, and this is a great segue into a situation I had yesterday I wanted to share with you. I thought, oh, this is really interesting timing. So I don't think dads often understand the impact their presence has on a situation, just their presence. So I was working yesterday and my 6 year old fell and hit her rib, landed on her rib. My wife didn't see it. And so the way she got up, it looked like she had hit her head. And when she got up, she wobbled and then passed out. And so, my wife immediately thinks head injury. She's unconscious, couldn't wake her up. She kind of came to and then went back out. And so we called 911. We had the paramedics come over. One of my daughters calls me at work. So I come home. And by the time I got here, she was alert. Paramedics had checked her out. She was fine. But it's obviously a stressful situation. I got my 4-year-old heard my wife yelling, call 911. My 15-year-old calls 911. My 11-year-old is, trying to communicate to me what's happening. And once we got through the situation, turns out she's fine. Everything's good. Probably just knocked the wind out of her, which caused her to pass out because she was panicking. There wasn't anything wrong with her. But I sat all my kids down with my wife and we had a really good conversation about calm in the chaos and how, like, you guys all did what you were supposed to do. And I was really proud of them. And also, like, now, how do you feel? Let's get it out in the open. Let's talk about it. Like, are you scared? What were you scared of? Why were you scared? Um, but 3 of my girls just wanted me home. And it was like, man, just I don't think a lot of dads recognize that, like, we carry that weight. And if we allow it to overwhelm us and we aren't present with our kids, it doesn't matter. Like, what we're doing otherwise as a provider, as a husband, as a father, is all that doesn't matter because all they wanted, they didn't care. Like, my daughter was like, I was like, well, I got to go to work tomorrow because I'm supposed to be off today, but I left work today. So I've got to go in tomorrow to take care of some stuff. And they were like, cool, we just need you here now. Like, they didn't care. Right. So I think it's important that you bring up the fact that, like, as leaders of our households, I don't view this kind of work as optional. Like, it's necessary. If we really want to raise, holistic, well-rounded children who are going to become adults, like the work that you do, the work that we're doing, I don't think it's optional. I think we have to be doing that. And so I just, I'd love your thoughts on what to look for in situations like that, how we could do better. Um, and how do we get fathers to understand, like, regardless of what your parents modeled for you, regardless of what society is telling you, this is not optional. This is required. Like, how do we make that? How do we get that across? Do you think?
So, so a few things here. So number one, so sorry, dude, that happened to your daughter. That would have definitely been, that would have definitely been scary,
Yeah,
especially,
yeah,
for the family that was,
yeah. Appreciate that.
that was there. And amazing job at how you facilitated, number one, that you made yourself available. You came home from work, and that also that of course you checked on everybody, made sure everything was fine, but then you sat everyone down and said, okay, how are you feeling right now? That was huge, bro. Those emotions. So here's, and I'll get to your question here in a second. What happens is when we experience emotions, especially intense emotions, the way I describe it is they become emotional knots. And if we don't
Okay.
intentionally massage those emotional knots, that, newsflash, they will become emotional Charlie horses. And
Hmm.
when they become emotional Charlie horses, that's an emotional trigger where you get emotionally hijacked, where you lose all control, and where I used to go to from Bruce Banner to the Incredible Hulk in 0.3 seconds, and have no idea what was going on, and literally not even be aware that I'm in Incredible Hulk mode until after I turn back into Bruce Banner. And my wife's like, dude, you realize what you just got done saying or doing? I'm like,
Yeah,
I have no idea what you're talking about. So to your point, this helping your family massage those emotional knots that they all had from a significant emotional event, like a sibling or a daughter have a medical emergency, dude. That, I don't care who you are, those are going to be some emotional
yeah,
triggers that you helped massage in their heart, mind, and body, so that, okay, we got to massage those knots with dad, those emotional knots. Okay, great. And that now they could, hey man, we just loved having you here, dad. It was amazing, right? So that was phenomenal. So now to your original question, dude, I mean, here's the thing. How's it working not paying attention to this stuff. Just
Mm.
go on Facebook, go on any social media platform for 2.5 minutes and tell me that you can't notice the emotional health of our society and our country right now. It's our nation has the EQ of a 5-year-old right now, right? You know what I mean? And so
It so feels like that sometimes, doesn't it? It's
right, and when you get emotionally hijacked in conversation and communication where you lose control, which you see every single day on social media, that is a hardcore red flag to a low EQ.
yeah,
That's literally an adult temper tantrum. Now, as a guy who had the EQ of a 5-year-old just 4 years ago, and I'm an old dude, like I'm not throwing stones, but I'm saying those other people that were like me also need to take ownership and responsibility of their low EQ, like I did, and start working on it because thankfully, EQ is a skill that can be learned. It's not an IQ where you're either popped out as a genius or
yeah,
you're dumb as a box of rocks. EQ, right? EQ is something that you can grow and develop.
yeah,
And dude, our society is desperate for emotionally healthy, emotionally
yeah,
intelligent men, not only for the homes, but also for their organizations, their businesses, their companies, whatever they're doing.
yeah, yeah. Um, Gosh, that's so good. And I had a thought and it totally escaped me.
Let me say one thing, Keith, while you're thinking. Something else to piggyback on that awesome story that you just shared, dude, about how you handled that intense, emotionally intense situation with your family, dude. Okay, one of the most powerful things that we can do in our homes is to be emotionally stable, emotionally available, and emotionally predictable. And if we're that's the most important thing a husband and wife can do for their children in terms of parenting is love each other, love their spouse.
Oh,
The
yeah,
more stable, the more emotionally stable that house is. Now, notice I'm not saying emotionally absent, right? Because I know a bunch of men are like, well, I don't ever show emotions. No, that's called emotionally unavailable. That's called
yeah,
you're not even aware of what's going on emotionally. I'm not saying that. When you have emotional stability, now those children can grow up because just being a kid, our daughter, she's 15, right? She's got the emotional hormones and cocktails going on right now
100%.
just by being a teenager.
Hmm.
So imagine adding two emotionally unhealthy adults in that mix to an emotionally unstable teenager just from being a teenager. You got a lot of volatility going on that can cause some long-term consequences. So the healthier emotionally the husband and wife can be, the more stable that platform. So now when my daughter is going through her ups and downs as just being a teenager, and going through those hormones and stuff, she can do it on an emotionally stable platform, an emotionally stable garden versus a garden that's in constant chaos.
Yeah,
And you know what I mean? So anyway, that it's dude, it's critical for this next generation, especially the more cognitive dissonance that goes on in our country right now of like what at one point what was good and is now bad, and at one point which was bad and is now good, right? We need emotionally healthy, emotionally intelligent people more than ever
yeah,
because it's almost like in the media and the government is doing more gaslighting than ever before in my lifetime anyway. And gaslighting is a form of emotional abuse and emotional trauma.
yeah, 100%. It really is. And I think part of where my motivation or my desire to raise emotionally intelligent kids and how we ended up on this path comes from like just that phrase of like make it make sense. Like there's so much going on that you're just like, wait a minute, like two and two isn't four anymore. And so how do I navigate that? Because it's I felt at one point just radically hopeless. Like you're watching things unfold socially, and I'm like, I can't control this. I can't fix this. I don't know how to manage all that out there, but what I can manage is me. I can control how I feel. I can control how I manage my emotions. And one of the things that we try to tell our kids is like, feel like if you're scared, say, I'm scared. And then let's ask why. Let's peel back the layers. Let's figure out why you're scared, and let's help you understand why maybe it isn't as scary. Or let's look at the evidence, and let's figure out how to manage that. But like, don't be unemotional. Be able to identify and use your vocabulary and draw those emotions out so that you can process them. And when I talk to people all the time, I've got 8 kids, and they're like, "Gosh, well, yeah, how do we teach them to save the world or deal with?" And I said, "I don't. I teach them to just love each other. Like, like my 8 will all marry, and in 2 3 generations, whatever that is, like that's my contribution. I can't fix what's out there." But I think you said something really important that I don't want to let go. Is this is a skill, and I'm a super firm believer in things happen through either skill or will. Like they either happen or they don't happen because of your will versus skill. Like I know how to do it, so I can do it, or I'm just going to will my way into learning it, figuring it out, whatever it is, right? And so I, for people that might be listening to this, going, "Man, this all sounds foreign. I don't really know how to unpack that." Yes, I have anger issues. Yes, I have patience issues. Yes, I have rage. All those things that we talked about that are triggers. It's a skill. And if you recognize in yourself and you have that awareness to go, this is an area I can improve on, it isn't something that's like, oh, well, I am who I am. This is, you can change this. You can build on this. You can develop the skill to do that. And it's never too late, right? Like, I'd love for you to talk about it a little bit, and maybe I'm putting you on the spot with this, but like from an emotional intelligence standpoint, because we talked about gaslighting a little bit, and it's like I mean, we could probably do an hour on that. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the power of like the apology and going, "Hey, I screwed up. I'm working on it." Like, I think some people don't understand how powerful that can be, and I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Okay, excellent, dude, excellent. Okay, couple things. I'm going to go back to something that you said earlier. That so one, so when you said in terms of our children, right? How do we do with our children? Absolutely love what you said there. Is let yourself feel whatever emotion that you're feeling in the moment. And here's one little tweak that I want to just throw out at you. So one thing that so a shoe is one of the triggers that led me down this path of emotional healing and emotional growth and stuff. Um, well, I'll skip the story. Let me just skip to the ending. So I was sitting on the edge. I totally went to an emotional 10. When my daughter, she was 10 years old. She'd gone to an emotional 10. And because I had no awareness and no emotional management, I went to a 10. Excuse me. And it had nothing to like, the only reason I went to a 10 is because she went to a 10.
Mm,
And the reason she went to a 10 had nothing to do with me. I was only in the same room. I had zero control of my own emotions. So when she went to a 10, I immediately went to a 10. And by God's grace, my bedroom was like 5 seconds away. So I walked over to the bedroom, locked myself in the bedroom, and I was shaking on the edge of my bed because I was so angry, and I didn't even know why. I didn't know what was going on. Right, I had no control. And so, boom, about 3 minutes later, my wife, knocked on the door. I let her in. She stood in the corner to watch me transfer back from Incredible Hulk to Bruce Banner. Once I chilled out, right, she's like, "Hey, Noble, can I share a couple things with you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, what's up?" She's like, "Do you?" So she's a couple things. She said, "Do you realize you can behave differently than how you feel?"
mm,
And I'm like, "That's impossible." And she's like, that's impossible for you, but that's not impossible for me and a lot of other people that have control over their own emotions. And I'm
mm.
like, and I said, babe, I said, when I am angry, I am angry.
Yeah.
There's no, and she said, and this is what, boom, and God body slam in that moment. So when we say, so if you notice what I just said there, that's an identity statement.
Hmm.
I am angry. Well,
Yeah.
that's not true. I am not the embodiment of anger. In that moment, so here's the more accurate way to say it. This is the better way to say it for us as adults and children. I feel angry. I feel frustrated, not I am frustrated. I
Yeah.
am angry, right? It's a minor, major detail there, right? So that's something to just think about there. So I feel okay. Now, apologies. Okay, this is huge. I just did training on this. I did a trigger workshop the first quarter. I'm right now in the middle of doing a boundaries workshop. Actually, this week, each night, free workshop on boundaries. But in the trigger workshop, one thing that I did was how to effectively apologize. And I just helped a coaching client that I'm working with go through the same process. So, so this is how you do an amazing apology. Because for 4 decades, dude, I would do weak sauce apologies to my wife and my
Mm,
family, and the reason is I had no EQ.
yeah.
I had no concept of how to do a good apology because I had no, dude. I was detached emotionally. I had no concept of EQ. Right? I had no anyway. So this is what I told him to do. I said, step one is write down all your emotional dysfunctions. List them out, all of them. Don't judge yourself. This is not to beat yourself up. This is not to ride the guilt train. This is not to condemn yourself, to judge yourself. This is just be an outside observer looking in. If you were watching Noble's life, if Noble were watching Noble's life from an outside perspective, what are all Noble's issues? So wrote down all 30 or 40, and that was just getting warmed up, 30 or 40 different issues. And then I told him, because I did this myself, then I told him, okay, once you write down all the emotional dysfunction, now I want you to write down all the emotions surrounding each dysfunction. How do you
Okay.
feel that I go from Bruce Banner to the Incredible Hulk in 0.3 seconds? Well, dude, I'm ashamed of it. I'm embarrassed. I'm angry that I can't control my own freaking emotions. I'm angry that I can't go for, instead of going to a 10, why can't I control myself and go to a 2 instead
Right.
of a 10? Like the fact that I have zero control of my own emotion, like, dude, what, like that's not manly in my opinion, right? That's
Right. That's the other
right,
thing. That's a whole
right.
other conversation.
Right. So boom. So right now all the emotions attached. Now, if you need to use a cheat sheet, go to Google emotion wheel and use an emotion wheel to help you write down other emotions around each dysfunction that you got. Okay. Then this is the next step. And this step was super powerful. I said, okay, now write down. So I want you to put yourself in your spouse's shoes. So using my wife as an example, write down all the behavior. And this whole thing, by the way, is both a self-awareness exercise and a social awareness exercise.
Okay.
Massive self-awareness and social awareness exercise. Now put yourself in your wife's shoes, write down all the behaviors that she has created as a result of each one of those emotional dysfunctions that you've got, that you've listed in step one. So, so my wife, as a result of living with an emotional Incredible Hulk and Bruce Banner, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, what think about the and not for like a week or 2 weeks, for 25
Yeah.
years, bro. 25 years. So my wife and daughter literally had to build emotional Fort Knoxes around themselves because they had no idea, are they going to get Dr. Jekyll right now? Are they going to get Mr. Hyde right now? Are they going to get Bruce Banner? Are they going to get Incredible Hulk, right? Like, so what are the consequences? And then once you put all the behaviors that your family has had to create as a result of my dysfunction, now,
Woo.
right, bro, this is heavy. This is
This
heavy
is
work,
good.
bro. It's heavy,
Seriously.
bro. Then the last step is now write down all the emotions that they have about your dysfunction as well. What emotions? So not just what behaviors did my behaviors create, but what emotions surround from my wife and my daughter because of that stuff. Now, and I'm getting to the apology piece. So here's a great apology principle that I learned many years ago. RFR, repentance, forgiveness, restoration. Repentance, forgiveness, restoration. So the repentance piece is, hey, babe, I am babe, I am so sorry about all the emotional dysfunction that I have brought into this house for the past 25 years in my case. And babe, hold on. Before you say anything, let me read off to you some of the emotional dysfunction that I'm aware of that I want to
Yeah.
tell you I'm sorry for, and go through my list of 40 different things. And then say, babe, here are the emotions that I have surrounding each of these different areas: ashamed, embarrassed, uh, 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 guilt filled, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
And then, babe, these are some of the behaviors that I know you have had to create because of my emotional dysfunction. Um, Building emotional Fort Knox, withdrawing from me, um, being unsure, right? Emotionally unsure, emotionally unstable because of my own unpredictability. Jaded, bitter, angry, frustrated, sad, depressed, right? All of those things, right? And then here are the emotions that you've probably felt. Babe, I am so not I apologize. I am so sorry. Sorry, when you say I'm so sorry, that's more personal. That's more intimate than I apologize. Apologize. Hey man, my bad. My bad. I apologize, bro. My bad. No, no, no. I am sorry
Yeah.
for making you feel these emotions. Okay, that's the repentance piece. I am sorry for making you feel this way. And then before I move on, I like to do this. Babe, okay, so now based on all that, how well do you think, how well do you feel seen, heard, and understood based on how I've hurt you? A scale 1 to 10, 100%, I nailed it, or one, I missed the
You
clue
missed it.
bus,
Yeah.
right? And if it's, and I say, listen, if it's anything other than 10, if it's a 7, I don't want to move on to the forgiveness stage yet until you get me to that next. I want get me to an 8. What am I missing? What am I missing? Well, babe,
Yep.
you okay, yeah, you got a lot of it, but man, you missed this and you missed this, you missed this. Like, babe, you're right. Not defending myself, not
Yeah.
getting defensive, not
Yeah. Because
well,
it's her perspective. It's what she's felt. So you don't get to say that's not. Yeah. It's just taking it on. Just let me have it.
boom.
Let me hear
That's
it.
right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Okay.
Not trying to defend myself, right? No, babe, man, you know what? You're right. I can totally see where you're coming from. And that probably made you feel this, and this emotion. And then, okay, now, babe, so now based on all that, how well do you feel seen, heard, and understood right now? Man, Noble, a 10. Man, that feels amazing. Thank you. And a lot of times they'll get emotional because I've never done that before. I've never, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, holy cow, like this is the first time in my life I genuinely feel like you understand the pain that I have,
Yep.
that you've put me through, right? And then I'll say, okay, now that I understand where you're coming from, will you forgive me? And then shut up. And I do one disclaimer. And babe, if right now you're not in a mental emotional state to forgive me right now, I completely get it, and that is totally fine. You
Yeah.
take as long as you need to forgive me, but I'm asking, will you forgive me? And then shut up, right? No more defense, no more like, no, no,
Yeah.
no. Will you forgive me? And wait for the response. And again, they may forgive you on the spot. If it was like me and it's been 25 years of injuries, it may take months. It may even take years before that forgiveness comes, right? And I have to be okay with that
Yeah.
because I brought my 25 years of emotional dysfunction to this family. Then the
Yeah.
third thing is also critical is the restoration. Babe, here are the following things that I am doing and how I'm working on myself so that and I don't want to say this is not going to happen again because I'm brand new in my EQ journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm 5 minutes into this emotional growth journey, but here are the things that I'm doing to grow my emotional intelligence and emotional health so that I will at least minimize and at some point hopefully never bring this stuff to the family again. Number one, I'm getting counseling once a month. Number two, I'm listening to Keith's podcast. Number three, I'm going to church every Sunday. Number four, I'm reading this book called Boundaries. Number five, I'm reading this other book called Changes That Heal by Dr. Henry Cloud. Number six, I've got a men's group that I'm a part of. Number seven, right? Whatever
Yeah.
that restoration plan is, but letting her know what your restoration plan is. And then I ask one last phase of this is, okay, so babe, based on my restoration plan, how do you feel? Is there anything else that I need to add to my restoration plan to help rebuild and re-earn trust with you?
That's powerful, man. That's huge. Yeah. I love that. And as you're walking through those three steps, it's absolutely in alignment with the concept that we teach on all the time: awareness, accountability, and action. It's right there. I mean, it's deeper for sure. I mean, it gets into the weeds. And you know, the the courage, I guess, that it takes to go through that process and to say, "Hey, here's what I see. If I'm not seeing all of it, give it to me." Asking for forgiveness without defense. Like that's one of the big things I see all the time is, we work with our kids and our men's group is like, I had a buddy of mine call me out a couple weeks ago, and he was like, "Hey, he's like, I got to be honest with you. He's like, my crew was kind of pissed at your crew because some things were said between our kids, and it sounded like they had overheard a conversation between my wife and I that they shouldn't have overheard, and so we weren't careful in where our audience or whatever." And he was explaining it to me, and my initial thought was, I was like, "Oh man, she must have overheard." And I stopped and I said, "No, you know what?" I said, "I'm sorry. That's it. You shouldn't have to go through that. I'm not sure what happened, but it doesn't matter." And what is what I realized in that experience was there's a ton of freedom in just saying, "I'm sorry." I could have tried to deflect, we could try to defend, we can justify, and all of those things have some truth to it, right? Like, yeah, my kid shouldn't have been eavesdropping. That is true. My They shouldn't have repeated what they said. That is true. But if you peel back the layers and get to the root cause of the problem was my wife and I had a conversation that wasn't behind closed doors in a secure space. And we know we got a bunch of kids that could overhear stuff, right? So yeah, I love, dude, there's so much there. Um, I got to get you to come out to one of our local events and just walk these guys through this because, like, especially in the only thing I keep thinking of as you were walking through that is that would save 90% of divorces.
Oh,
Like, it guts me. Divorce is one of my least, like, I'm very anti divorce. Um, to the point where I have friends who've gotten divorced and don't talk to me for a while because they feel like they've let me down. And I'm like, you didn't let me down. I'm opinionated. I have all sorts of thoughts about it. But like, if we would just talk to one another and just, like, if you take it off the table as an option, and what you shared just now, that ability to go, I brought all this to the table. And quite frankly, your wife carries a share of that conflict pie, right? She's brought stuff to the table. She's not perfect. Like, all of us, my wife has brought stuff to the table. The ability to just say, I see it, I want to fix it, I'm working on it, I'm gonna screw up again, but I'm gonna be quicker to restore it, right? Like, that's huge, man. That's huge. We got to get everybody on that page because legitimately, you would save a couple marriages.
totally agree, brother. Totally
That's
agree.
awesome.
Yeah.
Such
Thank you,
good
brother.
stuff. Such good stuff, man. I'm so grateful that our paths crossed, and um yeah, I want to honor your time. Are there I mean, you already dropped a couple books. You gave us tremendous exercises people can use. Like, this has been rich with actionable stuff, which I love. But is there anything you want? Like you said, you had a course going on right now. Where do we find you?
Yep. So it's eqgangster.com is my website. My podcast and YouTube are EQ Gangster. And then there's a free EQ 101 course on my website that they can go check out. I also have an emotional fitness community where we meet twice a month. It's called the EQ Mafia. They can check that out also on eqgangster.com. And then social media on LinkedIn and Facebook, it's at The Noble Gibbons. and Instagram is at the Noble Gibbons as well. So
Yeah, I love it, man. You dropped some real knowledge today, and hopefully we
thanks,
can move
brother.
some families forward. I love everything you're doing. I appreciate you so much, and we'll have to do this again.
That'd be awesome, man. Thank you for all you're doing, brother. Appreciate you, Keith.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, brother.